We got in the car on December 26th this year, the day after Christmas, and decided we were going to go see our family that live in Southwest Michigan. And the first thing we did very early in the morning on that day, as we do on many trips, is we turn on the radio and try to decide what we're in the mood to hear. And what we were in the mood to hear that morning was Christmas music, because we had just been in the Christmas mode. We'd been here on Christmas Eve, and we celebrated the feast on Christmas Day. But do you know, on December the 26th, in the car, and I'm talking about a radio, not just regular radio, not just broadcast. I wasn't limited to the stations that are in Dane County or in South Central Wisconsin. We buy the whole Sirius satellite radio package, and on all those channels, on December the 26th, there was not a Christmas song to be heard on the radio. I've been putting it off all this time. Not so at St Barnabas this morning. We get to sing them all still. In fact, we have 3 more days for singing it. Never mind that it says Epiphany on the front of the booklet. There's a budgetary reason for that, and not one that's liturgical this morning. And the reason that I love having this time to ruminate on Christmas is because these stories are so rich and layered. The story that we get in Matthew's gospel this morning, actually we get just nuggets of it, and we'll have to remember some other parts of it. It works in so many ways to explain to us what we're supposed to think about this person, Jesus of Nazareth. And what that person, Jesus of Nazareth, not only means to us, but means to our race and to the dignity that God has restored to our race, as we heard in our opening collect this morning. That he marvelously created, but even more marvelously restored the dignity of every human being through this person, Jesus of Nazareth, who isn't even an actor in these stories. He's a baby. We don't even get to hear him cry. We don't even get to hear him pull the mule over on this trip so that they can feed him. He doesn't do anything but get carried along. And so I'm so glad that we have time to spend to think about these stories, because they work in so many ways and they reveal so much to us about the person of Jesus without Jesus doing anything at all. And in fact, as we've seen throughout the ages, and as many scholars note, by the end of the first 2 chapters of Matthew, or the first 2 chapters of Luke, depending on which story of Jesus' childhood you're reading, you actually already know everything you would ever need to know about Jesus, to know that he could restore the dignity of every human being. Well, the first layer that works so well for the people that would have been reading Matthew's story and is less well for us. In fact, you might think that this is more an academic pursuit, but it really is just a real base reading of this for any person who would have received Matthew's gospel in the first century. And that is, they would have noticed right away that Jesus of Nazareth sounds an awful lot like somebody else they've already read stories about. In fact, in Matthew's gospel, in these first 2 chapters, it starts with a genealogy. The place Egypt is mentioned. There are soothsayers from an eastern country. There's this guy named Joseph that has lots of dreams. There's an evil king that kills lots of children. All in the story. And every reader of this in the first century, especially in Israel, would have thought, this is a story about Moses. It's got all the same parts as the Moses story. Because Matthew is trying to put in place something for you to know about Jesus, that he is like Moses. And so that when you read the story of Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount, or you read the story of Jesus feeding 5,000 people with 2 loaves, or 5 loaves and 2 fishes, or when you hear the story of Jesus being transfigured on the Mount, as we will when we end our Epiphany season this year, you would know that there is something about who Moses was as a leader of people, as the moderator of a covenant between God and his people. But most of all, is a teacher, is one who can go and can explain what it means to live as a holy people through a holy code that Jesus will lay out for his folks. And there's no way an early reader of this would have missed this. They would have said, this is exactly the story of Moses. We move things around a little bit. Joseph doesn't become the ancient ancestor of Moses. He becomes his immediate father. but things move through dreams. And escape to Egypt and escape from Egypt are important parts of this. Something about that story of Moses lets me know what this person, Jesus of Nazareth, will be. But there's another way that this story works too that gives you everything you need to know. And that is, in the story of Jesus, as it starts with his kingly lineage and the genealogy, it moves on to having an angel come and announce to his father Joseph good news. He says, I bring you tidings of good news. These good news is this child you're going to have. It starts with a proclamation that good news is here in the person of this baby. But the story turns dark, literally. It turns dark to where magi are looking in the night sky for some supernatural way to interpret what is happening in the world around them by looking at the stars and the other heavenly celestial lights in the sky and trying to figure out how the world is changing by looking outside of it. And then it gets even darker when they show up and they talk to Herod. And they talk to Herod and his scribes and his priests, who are very scared that something is about to turn over the world that they've created. So much so that Herod goes on a rampage and kills children, and the story gets even darker. And Jesus is only saved by the dream his father had to escape to Egypt and to come back. And when he gets back, he finds that there's another evil ruler and more evil priests. That in this story, these first two chapters of Matthew wants to lay out the arc that you're going to be taken on in the story of the adult Jesus, where he's going to show up. If you come back in a few years, when we get back to Matthew's gospel and the regular cycle of things, you will hear the proclamation of good news. And from there, it's all downhill into a grave for Jesus, where there will be characters like there are at the end of chapter 2 of Matthew, of an evil ruler and evil priests. And there will be people seeking Jesus from outside the country. But God will ultimately deliver him. And so Matthew, not only is he making you think about Moses, he's giving you the story arc, the path that he's going to take you on in the person of Jesus, who will proclaim good news, but that proclamation doesn't lead to an ever-ascending popularity and authority and good things happening in the world. In fact, sometimes those bad things seem to be amplified by the fight between the good news that Jesus embodies and the bad news that the world wishes to hold on to, that is about to be upheaved and turned over by the birth of this child. But if all of that is happening, whether you call that literary or academic, there is also a layer at which this story works for us when we allow it to, that you don't need any special education to figure out. And that's a story about an unwed mother who finds herself pregnant, about two people that find themselves in a country where it becomes uninhabitable for them to stay, and they have to leave, and they become refugees to another country. And when they want to come home, we actually find out, if you're reading very closely, Nazareth is not Joseph's first choice for settling. And I wonder if that's because he knows that Nazareth, that hometown of his, still carries this rumor of this woman he is betrothed to who found herself pregnant. It's not where he wants to go, but he only has to go because things are so bad in the place where he wishes he could land. It's a story about somebody who is settling for a place instead of getting the place that they want. And that is something that's very different and that these readers would have noticed, because Moses isn't that way. Moses is from an intact family. Moses gets raised in a court. He's not born in a stable. And the writer, Matthew, here is saying, you're supposed to look at this person like Moses, but he's got none of the parts you want him to have. He's got no education. He doesn't have a good family of origin. His family doesn't have the kind of means to live where they wish they could live. Jesus is going to do all of these things. He's going to turn the world over. But he's going to come from a place that we think is not the place of a leader. And yet, this is God incarnate in this person, Jesus of Nazareth. So when you think about Jesus, when you think about the world that you interact with and you come into contact with, and the people that you see, we must remember that Jesus, and this doesn't take anything, I didn't have to go to school to figure out that Mary is pregnant and they're not married. I didn't have to go to school to know that if you leave a country because things are so bad there and a ruler is killing people, that you're a refugee. That's where Jesus comes from. That's to teach us something about who Jesus is. And that is, Jesus is not who we would expect or what we would choose or what we would want. Because we might want Moses and we might want somebody who can turn over the world, but the last thing we need is a bastard child and a refugee, one that has to keep moving and moving and moving and settling. You learn everything you need to know about Jesus, the expected and the surprising. At the end of this story, Matthew could stop writing because from Matthew's point of view, you know enough. You know enough to have your dignity restored by recognizing the dignity that Jesus brings to all people. Unwed mothers, refugees, those who are transient and vagrant, those that require dreams to tell them where to go and hear voices in the night. Jesus brings dignity to them too, because that is Jesus' story as well. Amen.